It was a small town where almost everyone knew each other by face, if not by name. The cafe at the corner of the main street was the kind of place where stories were whispered, music drifted from old speakers, and regulars never missed their morning coffee. Among the familiar faces was a quiet girl who worked there. She wasn't loud or outgoing. She didn't try to draw attention or talk much. Most people just knew her as the one who always wore a soft smile and moved quietly between the tables, taking orders and wiping counters. She had been working there for over a year, and though she saw the same people every day, few really knew her. She would greet customers with a polite nod, hand them their coffee, and return to her corner near the counter. Her voice was calm but hardly ever heard. People often described her as shy, maybe even too quiet. But no one ever guessed what she carried inside. The cafe wasn't just known for its food. Every Friday night they hosted a small open mic event. Locals would come to sing, play guitar, or share poetry. Sometimes the place was filled with laughter, sometimes silence depending on who took the stage. In one corner stood an old upright piano. Its surface was scratched, its color slightly faded, but it still held a charm of its own. That piano had been there longer than most people could remember, and almost every evening when the music played, the quiet girl would glance at it, her eyes soft but full of something deep, something like longing. She always worked during the events, serving drinks and clearing tables, but her mind was somewhere else. Each note that floated across the room seemed to touch a part of her she tried to hide. No one noticed how her fingers sometimes moved slightly when she walked past the piano, as if her hands remembered something they wanted to do again. But she never sat down to play. Not once. People often assumed she wasn't interested in the music. She seemed too reserved, too distant. Sometimes the local musicians joked among themselves, saying, "Imagine if the quiet girl played that piano. Probably just bang random keys." They laughed, never thinking their words might reach her. She heard them, of course, but she never said a word. She just smiled faintly, pretending not to care. The truth was that piano meant more to her than anyone could imagine. It reminded her of a time long gone, of someone who used to sit beside her teaching her how to find melodies in silence. Those memories were both warm and painful, and for that reason she kept them locked away. Every time her eyes met the piano, it was like seeing a piece of her past she wasn't ready to touch. One evening, the cafe was unusually crowded. A group of local musicians had come to perform. The atmosphere was lively, filled with chatter and clinking glasses. The quiet girl moved between the tables, serving drinks, while her mind wandered as always. But then something unexpected happened. The band's pianist didn't show up. They waited for almost half an hour, trying to reach him, but his phone stayed off. The group began to worry. They couldn't perform their set without a pianist. The cafe owner, a kind but busy man, walked over to them and said, "Maybe you can just play without the piano tonight." But the band shook their heads. One of them laughed and said, "Unless the quiet one wants to join in." The others laughed too. The quiet girl froze for a second when she heard that. Everyone's eyes turned to her for a brief moment. She quickly looked down, embarrassed, pretending not to have heard. "I'm sure she can't even tell which key is which," someone joked, and the laughter grew louder. Even the owner chuckled a little, though he gave them a look that said they were being too harsh. The quiet girl forced a small smile and continued working. But inside something stirred, a mix of hurt and curiosity. It wasn't the first time someone had underestimated her, but tonight, for some reason, it stung a bit more. Maybe because deep down, she knew they were wrong. When the music finally started, she stood near the counter, her hands slightly trembling as she listened. The songs were cheerful, but her heart felt heavy. Every note made her remember the way her mother used to play when she was little, the way music filled their small home and made everything seem brighter. She remembered sitting beside her mother, trying to reach the keys, laughing when her fingers hit the wrong ones. Those moments were gone now, but the feeling stayed. The crowd clapped and sang along, but the quiet girl's eyes stayed fixed on the piano. That old instrument seemed to call her softly, patiently, as if waiting for her to return. When the night ended and the cafe emptied, she cleaned the tables in silence. The lights dimmed, leaving only a few lamps glowing near the bar. The piano sat alone, half in shadow. She walked past it, her heart beating fast for reasons she didn't understand. She stopped, looked around. The place was empty now. The last of the staff had left, and the owner had gone upstairs to his office. It was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the sound of her own breathing. She hesitated for a long moment. Then, almost without realizing it, she walked toward the piano. Her fingers brushed the dusty surface and a soft smile appeared on her face. She sat down slowly, as if afraid the bench might reject her. For a few seconds, she just sat there, her hands resting on her knees. The silence felt heavy, like the air itself was holding its breath. Then she lifted her hands and placed them gently on the keys. Her heart pounded. At first she didn't play. She just pressed one key, then another. The sound was slightly out of tune, but it didn't matter. Her eyes closed and her fingers began to move almost on their own. The melody that came out was soft, delicate, almost like a whisper. It wasn't loud or dramatic, it was honest, pure, and full of emotion. It was as if the piano had been waiting to speak again, and now her fingers were helping it find its voice. The cleaner, who was sweeping near the entrance, froze. He turned slowly, not believing what he was hearing. The sound filled the empty cafe, wrapping around the room like a gentle wind. The quiet girl was no longer just the silent worker. She looked different now. Her posture changed. Her face relaxed, eyes closed, lost in the rhythm. Every note seemed to tell a story of loss, love, and hidden strength. When the song ended, the room felt different. Even the air seemed still. The cleaner didn't say a word. He simply stood there, moved in a way he couldn't explain. The girl opened her eyes and saw him watching. She smiled shyly, almost apologetic. "Sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to." He shook his head. "Don't apologize," he said softly. "That was beautiful." She lowered her gaze, her cheeks slightly red. It was the first time anyone had heard her play since her mother passed away years ago. For a long time she thought she had forgotten how, but tonight proved she hadn't lost it. The music had just been waiting for her to find it again. When she walked home that night, the streets were quiet. The cool air brushed against her face, and for the first time in years she felt light. A small spark had awakened inside her, something she thought was gone forever. She didn't know why she decided to play that night. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe courage, or maybe just the need to feel close to the part of herself she had hidden away for too long. As she reached her small apartment, she sat by the window and looked at the stars. Her hands still tingled from the keys. The memory of the melody echoed softly in her mind. She smiled to herself. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and somehow that was enough. Back at the cafe, the cleaner was still thinking about what he heard. The next morning, he told the owner about it. "You won't believe it," he said. "The quiet girl, she played the piano last night." And it was something else. The owner laughed at first, but when he saw the serious look on the cleaner's face, he grew curious. "Really?" he said. "She never told me she could play." From that day on, something subtle changed in the air. People didn't know what had happened, but the girl's steps seemed lighter, her smile a little more real. No one else knew yet what she was capable of. But soon everyone would find out. Because that quiet girl, the one no one believed could play, had a gift that was about to speak louder than any words ever could. The next morning felt different at the cafe. The sun poured through the windows, lighting up the little tables where regulars sat sipping their tea. The quiet girl came in as usual, tying her apron and getting ready for another busy day. But deep inside she carried a feeling she couldn't explain. It was like something inside her had finally woken up after a long sleep. She smiled a little more that morning. Her steps were light as she arranged the chairs and set the trays. She didn't think anyone knew what had happened the night before, but she was wrong. The cleaner had told the cafe owner about her playing. When the owner walked in, he looked at her differently. There was curiosity in his eyes, maybe even a bit of surprise. "So," he said as he wiped the counter, "I heard you played the piano last night." She froze, her face turning pink. "Oh, I was just trying it out," she said quietly. He smiled. "Just trying?" "The cleaner said you played beautifully. Why didn't you ever tell me you could do that?" Her hands tightened around the tray she was holding. "I haven't played in a long time," she whispered. "Well, maybe you should," he said warmly. "You've been keeping talent like that locked away. That's not fair to the world, is it?" She gave a small, shy smile but didn't reply. The truth was, she didn't play for attention. She played because it felt like breathing again, something her heart had needed for years. As the day went on, she tried to focus on her work, but her mind kept drifting back to the piano. Every time she walked past it, her chest felt tight, as if the keys were calling her name. The sound of last night's melody still echoed in her head. It was hard to describe what she had felt when she played. A mix of pain, relief, and peace all at once. Later that evening, when the cafe began to fill up, she noticed a few familiar faces from the local band who played there every Friday. They were sitting at a table near the back, laughing loudly as usual. When they saw her, one of them waved jokingly. "Hey, you really played the piano last night?" he said with a grin. "The cleaner told us." "Thought it was a joke?" She blushed and shook her head, trying to downplay it. "I just pressed a few keys," she said softly. Another laughed. "Come on, don't be shy. We might need a new pianist soon if you're that good." Their words were teasing but not cruel this time. She smiled politely and went back to her work. But inside she could feel a small spark of excitement. For once they weren't laughing at her. They were curious. That night when the cafe emptied again, she stayed behind a little longer. The owner, who was closing the register, noticed her lingering near the piano. He gave her a knowing look. "Go ahead," he said quietly. "You can play a little before you leave." Her heart raced. She hesitated, but the encouragement in his voice gave her courage. She sat down again and her fingers found their place on the keys. This time she didn't hold back. The music started slow, almost uncertain, then grew into something strong and graceful. Each note carried emotion she hadn't spoken in years. The owner stopped what he was doing and just listened. There was something in her music that pulled people in, something real. When she finished, he clapped softly. "That," he said, "was the best sound this cafe has ever heard." She smiled, her eyes glistening a little. "Thank you," she whispered. The owner looked thoughtful for a moment. "You know, this weekend we're having the open mic night again," he said. "What do you say you play one song?" Her eyes widened. "Me? No, I can't do that," she said quickly. "I've never played in front of people before." "Sure you can," he said. "You already played in front of me. Besides, I think everyone should hear what I heard tonight." She shook her head, her heart pounding. "I'm not ready," she said softly. He didn't push her, just smiled and said, "Think about it. Sometimes the world needs to hear the quietest hearts." That sentence stayed in her head for days. The following evenings, when the cafe was empty, she found herself sitting at the piano more often. She practiced quietly, never too long, always afraid someone might hear. The music that came from her fingers wasn't perfect. There were missed notes and small mistakes. But it had life. It had emotion. It had truth. One night as she played, the cleaner stopped again to listen. "You should really play for people," he said. "You have something special." She smiled but didn't answer. Deep down she wanted to believe him. But fear always whispered louder. Fear of being judged, fear of not being good enough, fear of the past. A few days later, the cafe was busier than usual. Posters for the weekend open mic night were up on the walls. Musicians were signing up to perform. The owner looked at her and said, "There's still one spot left if you change your mind." She tried to smile. "Maybe next time," she said softly. That night, as she was leaving, she heard the band practicing in the back room. They were missing their pianist again. The lead singer sighed and said, "We can't keep doing this without someone on the keys." Another band member looked at her and said, half joking, "You sure you don't want to help us out? You could save the night." Everyone laughed, but she didn't this time. For some reason, she paused and said quietly, "Maybe I could." "Try." The laughter stopped. They looked at her surprised. "Wait, really?" one of them asked. She nodded slowly. "Just for practice," she said. They led her to the piano, half expecting her to give up. But when her fingers touched the keys, everything changed. The sound that came out was rich and alive. The band exchanged stunned looks. They started playing along, and for the first time she was part of something bigger, a rhythm that connected everyone in the room. When the song ended, there was silence. Then one of them said quietly, "That was incredible." She looked down, her cheeks pink, unsure how to react. But inside she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, belonging. The next morning the owner called her aside. "So," he said with a grin, "I heard you played with the band last night." She nodded shyly. "They want you to play with them this weekend," he said. "I told them it's your choice." Her heart skipped a beat. "Play on stage? In front of everyone?" He nodded. "Yes. They said you're the best they've heard in a long time." For the rest of the day, she couldn't focus. Her mind was spinning. Could she really do it? The thought terrified her. But at the same time, there was a small voice inside her that whispered, "Why not?" That night, she went home and sat by the small window of her apartment again. The city lights flickered below, and she thought about her mother. How she used to say that music wasn't just sound, it was emotion given shape. She remembered her mother's gentle voice saying, "Never stop playing, no matter how quiet life becomes." Tears filled her eyes as she whispered to the empty room, "Maybe it's time." Over the next 2 days, she practiced every evening after closing. The band would join sometimes, helping her prepare for the weekend performance. Each time she played, she felt her confidence grow just a little more. The music came alive under her touch, and soon even customers who stayed late began to notice. "She's really good," someone whispered one night. "Why hasn't she played before?" Friday evening came faster than she expected. The cafe was packed. The warm glow of the lights, the chatter of people, and the hum of excitement filled the air. Her heart pounded as she stood behind the counter, wiping her hands nervously. The owner gave her a reassuring smile. "You'll do great," he said. The band was setting up. When the pianist didn't show again, they called her name from across the room. "You ready?" She took a deep breath. Her hands were trembling. For a second, she thought of saying no, of running out the door and pretending she never agreed. But something stronger held her still. She looked toward the piano. It was waiting just like it had been all those nights. She took another breath, walked forward, and sat down. The crowd quieted, wondering what was happening. No one had ever seen her touch that piano before. The band gave her a small nod, and then she began to play. The sound of her first note was almost too soft to hear, like a whisper afraid to speak. But in that moment, the cafe fell completely silent. Even the chatter at the back tables stopped. Everyone turned their heads toward the stage where the quiet girl sat at the old piano. Her fingers trembled slightly as they touched the keys, but once she began to play, it was as if she and the piano became one. At first, the melody was gentle, uncertain. Then it began to flow, smooth and graceful, like water finding its way through stones. The band followed her lead, blending their instruments around her notes. But even with them playing, it was her sound that filled the room. It wasn't loud or showy, it was honest. Every note carried a feeling, something raw and real, something that reached straight to the heart. People who had come just for coffee or laughter suddenly found themselves listening without meaning to. The waiters stopped moving. The owner, standing near the counter, froze with a cup in his hand. Even those walking outside the cafe paused by the window. There was something about the way she played that made time feel slower. Her eyes stayed closed most of the time, as if she was lost somewhere far away. Her fingers moved effortlessly, painting emotions in the air. Sadness, hope, love, and pain all mixed together. The song didn't need words because it already spoke everything she couldn't say out loud. When the final note lingered in the air, there was a heartbeat of silence. Then the room erupted. People clapped, cheered, some even stood up. The sound was overwhelming, but she didn't smile right away. She just sat there breathing heavily, her hands still on the keys. For a moment, she looked like she couldn't believe what had just happened. The band looked at her with wide eyes. One of them whispered, "That was unreal." She finally looked up, and when she saw the crowd clapping for her, tears filled her eyes. She smiled, shy and disbelieving, but happy in a way she hadn't felt in years. The owner came forward, clapping louder than anyone. "That," he said proudly, "was the moment everyone here will remember." She tried to speak, but her voice cracked. "Thank you," she managed to whisper. That night, the cafe stayed open longer than usual. People kept coming up to her, asking how long she'd been playing, where she learned, if she had ever performed before. She was overwhelmed by all the attention, answering each question softly, always with a smile that came from deep inside. For the first time, people weren't laughing at her. They were amazed by her. Later, when the crowd left and the lights dimmed, she sat alone at the piano again. Her hands rested gently on the keys, still trembling from excitement. She could still hear the applause in her ears. For years she had kept her music hidden, afraid to be seen, but now the world had heard her and it felt right. The owner came over smiling. "You changed this place tonight," he said. "You brought something real." She looked up at him, still in disbelief. "I didn't think anyone would care," she said quietly. He shook his head. "People always care when something comes from the heart. You just reminded them." Over the next few days, things started to change. The cafe got busier, and more people came in asking, "Is the girl who played the piano here?" Some wanted to meet her, others just wanted to listen again. A few even asked if she had recordings online. She didn't, of course. She had never even thought of that. The local newspaper sent a small reporter who wrote a piece about the quiet girl with the golden hands. The article spread quickly, and soon, people from nearby towns began visiting just to hear her play. But fame wasn't what she wanted. Every time she sat at that piano, she played for the same reason she always had: to feel, to remember, to heal. Still, the attention made her nervous. Some nights she would stare at the piano before sitting down, afraid she wouldn't be able to play like before. But the moment her fingers touched the keys, the fear disappeared. The music took over. One evening, after another small performance, a man approached her. He looked older, kind-faced, with a calm presence. "You play beautifully," he said. "Do you teach?" She shook her head, smiling. "No, I've never taught anyone. I only play for myself." He nodded thoughtfully. "Well, you have a gift, and gifts are meant to be shared. My daughter's learning piano. Maybe she could watch you play sometime." The thought warmed her heart. "Of course," she said. "I'd be happy to." That small conversation sparked something new in her. For the first time, she thought maybe her music could mean something more than just sound. It could touch others, inspire them, maybe even help them find their own voices. But even with the growing attention, she stayed the same. She still worked her shifts, served coffee, cleaned tables. She didn't see herself as special. She just played when she felt it. And every time she did, the cafe filled with that same quiet magic. One Friday evening, as she was wiping the counter, the owner approached her with a bright smile. "I have news," he said. "There's a music event in the city next week. Small stage, but a big crowd. They're looking for local talent. I told them about you." Her eyes widened. "You didn't," she said, almost panicking. "I did," he laughed gently. "And they want you to play one song." She shook her head. "I can't, that's too big. I'm not ready for that." He leaned on the counter. "You said the same thing about playing here, remember? And look how that turned out." She stayed quiet, unsure what to say. The thought of performing in a bigger place scared her. But a small part of her felt curious too. Could she really do it? Could she play for strangers outside her little world? That night she went home and sat in front of her small keyboard. She closed her eyes and imagined a bigger crowd, brighter lights, louder applause. Her stomach tightened with fear, but also with something else, hope. The next day she agreed. "Just one song," she said softly. "That's all." When the night of the event arrived, the cafe owner and a few regulars came to support her. She stood backstage listening to other musicians perform. Their confidence made her nervous. Her hands were cold, her heart pounding. She almost turned back, but then she remembered her mother's words. "Never stop playing, no matter how quiet life becomes." When her name was called, she stepped onto the stage. The lights were brighter than she expected. She could barely see the audience. She sat at the grand piano, took a deep breath, and began to play. At first, she felt the same fear she always did before a new beginning. But as the melody flowed, her fear melted away. She didn't think about the crowd anymore. She didn't think about mistakes or judgment. She only thought about the music, the way her mother's hands once guided hers, the sound of laughter in their old home, the quiet nights when the piano was her only friend. The audience listened in complete silence. Even the smallest sound disappeared. Her music filled every corner of the room, soft yet powerful. When she finished, there was another pause, that same magical moment when no one wanted to breathe. Then the applause came, loud, sincere, endless. Tears rolled down her cheeks. It wasn't because of the applause. It was because she finally realized something. She had found her voice again, through the only language she ever truly knew: music. After the performance, people came up to her, asking her name, her story, where she learned. She smiled and answered softly, "I learned at home. My mother taught me." A music teacher from the event approached her and said, "You have something rare. Not just skill, heart. I can feel every note you play. If you ever want to study or perform more, I can help you." She was touched, but she didn't give an answer that night. She wasn't sure where this new path would lead her. All she knew was that something inside her had changed forever. When she returned to the cafe the next morning, she was welcomed with cheers and hugs. The owner had watched her performance online, and he looked proud enough to cry. "I told you," he said, smiling. You were born for this. She laughed softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Maybe, she said. But I was also born to serve coffee and smile at kind people. He chuckled. Well, maybe you can do both. As she walked over to the piano, she touched the worn keys lovingly. It was this old instrument that had given her back her voice. She sat down, pressed a few keys, and started playing again. The morning light poured through the windows, catching the dust in the air, turning it into tiny stars around her. People slowly stopped talking, as they always did when she played. The music filled the cafe once more, calm, beautiful, full of feeling. And in that moment it was clear to everyone who listened that her fingers didn't just play notes, they spoke. The days after her performance felt like a dream. People still talked about the quiet girl who played the piano like her soul was speaking. The cafe became even more popular, filled with faces she had never seen before. Some came from faraway towns saying they had watched her video online and wanted to hear her live. At first she couldn't believe it. Someone had recorded her performance at the city event and uploaded it. The video spread faster than she ever imagined. Comments poured in, people saying how her music made them cry, how it reminded them of things they had forgotten, how it felt like the melody understood their hearts. She read each message slowly, sometimes with a smile, sometimes with tears in her eyes. For so long she had thought her music meant nothing, but now it was touching lives in ways she never expected. Still, even with all the excitement, she stayed the same. She kept her humble job at the cafe, helped customers, and played only when she felt it in her heart. But deep inside, there was still something she hadn't told anyone. Something that lived quietly in her heart, hidden behind her calm smile, the reason her music carried so much feeling. One night, after closing, she sat alone in the cafe staring at the piano. The owner came by, wiping his hands on a towel. You should be proud, he said warmly. You've brought this place to life. She smiled faintly. It feels strange, she said softly. I never thought people would listen to me. He leaned against the counter, watching her. You know, I've always wondered, he said gently. Where did you learn to play like that? You never took lessons, did you? She hesitated. Her fingers brushed over the piano keys, but she didn't press them. I learned from my mother, she finally said, her voice low. She used to be a piano teacher. Music was her world. The owner nodded. She must have been proud of you. A sad smile appeared on her face. She was, until she wasn't there anymore. He stayed quiet, sensing the heaviness in her tone. She continued slowly, as if opening a door she had kept closed for too long. When I was little, she said, our house was always filled with music. My mother played every morning. Sometimes soft, sometimes loud, but always with joy. She used to sit me beside her, guiding my hands on the keys. She said that the piano wasn't just an instrument, it was a way to speak without words. She used to tell me that music has a heart, and if you listen carefully, it will tell you its secrets. Her eyes softened at the memory. We didn't have much, but we had those moments. When I played, she would smile like everything in the world was perfect. I thought it would always be like that. The owner listened quietly, not wanting to interrupt. Then she got sick, the girl said softly. It happened slowly. One day she was playing, and the next she couldn't even stand. I was too young to understand what was happening, but I could see the pain in her eyes when she looked at the piano. She wanted to play, but her hands wouldn't move like they used to. Her voice trembled, but she kept going. The house grew quiet. I tried to play for her to make her smile, but every time I did, I ended up crying instead. When she passed away, I stopped playing. I couldn't even look at a piano without feeling like I was losing her all over again. The cafe was silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the lights. I worked small jobs after school, moved to this town and started working here, she said. The piano in this cafe, I used to avoid it. Just looking at it hurt, but somehow I always found myself staring at it. It reminded me of her. I think I was waiting for the right moment to touch it again. The owner placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. You gave her voice back when you played, he said. That's why it felt so powerful. It wasn't just music, it was love. Tears filled her eyes. Maybe, she whispered, but I think it was her speaking through me. My fingers moved like they remembered something my heart forgot. That night after he left, she stayed there for a while, her fingers slowly tracing the keys. She began to play one of the songs her mother used to love. The notes were soft and full of longing. It was the song her mother had played the day she first taught her to follow her heart. As the music filled the quiet cafe, she smiled through her tears. For the first time in years, it didn't hurt to remember. It felt peaceful, like her mother was sitting beside her again, listening quietly, proud as always. The next few days were busy. More people wanted to hear her story. A local radio host invited her for an interview. She was nervous but agreed, not for attention, but because she wanted to tell the truth about where her music came from. During the interview, she spoke softly but clearly. "Music saved me," she said. "It was the only way I could talk to my mother after she was gone. Every time I play, I feel her near. That's why I never stopped completely. Even in silence, she was there." The host asked, "Did you ever think your story would touch so many people?" She shook her head. "No," she said with a gentle smile. "I just played what I felt. Maybe that's why people listen. It's not perfect, but it's real." After that, her story spread even more. People began calling her the girl whose fingers spoke. Musicians from other towns reached out asking to collaborate. A small music school invited her to teach children how to play from the heart, not just by reading notes. At first, she was unsure. Teaching was something she had never done. But when she met the children, she saw in them the same curiosity she once had. They weren't afraid to make mistakes, they just wanted to feel the music. Watching them reminded her of her mother's patience, and she found herself smiling more than ever. One day while she was teaching, a little girl looked up at her and asked, "Who taught you to play like that?" She paused, then smiled softly. "Someone who loved me very much," she said. In that moment, she realized something. Her mother's lessons had never really ended. They had lived on through her, through every song she played and every note she taught others to feel. As the months passed, she became a quiet inspiration in her town. She didn't chase fame or recognition. She just played, taught, and smiled at those who found comfort in her music. The cafe remained her second home. Every weekend, people still gathered there to listen. The piano, once a dusty old instrument in the corner, now carried countless memories. Sometimes she would see strangers sitting in the cafe, eyes closed, listening quietly. And she understood they weren't just hearing the notes. They were hearing what she felt, the love, the loss, the healing. One evening, after finishing her last song, she looked around at the people clapping softly. She saw smiles, teary eyes, warmth. That was when she realized what her mother meant all those years ago. Music wasn't about being perfect. It was about connecting hearts without words. After everyone left, she stayed behind as usual. The owner turned off the lights except for the one over the piano. "You've come a long way," he said quietly. She smiled. "I guess I finally stopped hiding," he nodded. "And you made everyone believe again. Believe that quiet things can be powerful too." When he left, she sat alone, her fingers resting on the piano. The night outside was still, and the stars were bright through the windows. She took a deep breath and began to play the same melody she had played for her mother all those years ago. It flowed softly, beautifully, each note like a memory drifting through time. This time, she didn't cry. She smiled, because now the pain had turned into peace, and as the last note faded into the quiet night, she whispered, "Thank you, Mom, for giving me the music." Months passed and life settled into a peaceful rhythm. The cafe remained the heart of her music, the place where everything had begun again. She taught children during the day, played in the evenings, and helped the cafe owner with little things when needed. It wasn't fame she wanted. It was peace, and she had finally found some. But sometimes life has its own plans. One quiet afternoon, as she was teaching a small group of students in the cafe, a man walked in. He carried a small camera and a notebook. He watched her quietly as she guided the children through the keys, showing them how to listen to the sound instead of just pressing the notes. After the class ended, he approached her politely. "Excuse me," he said. "My name's not important, but I work for a music magazine. I've been following your story. Would you mind if we talked?" She looked surprised. "My story?" He smiled. "Yes, the quiet girl who plays with her heart. People talk about you everywhere now. Your video has millions of views. I wanted to know what drives you to play the way you do." She hesitated but nodded. "You can sit," she said softly. He sat across from her as she wiped her hands with a napkin. She didn't dress fancy, didn't act like someone famous. There was a gentle calm in the way she moved. "So," the reporter began, You don't perform on big stages or join competitions, even though you could easily become a professional pianist. Why? She looked down for a moment before answering. Because the piano isn't about showing off, she said simply. It's about telling a story. Every song I play has a memory behind it. My mother taught me that music isn't made for crowds, it's made for hearts. If someone feels something when they hear it, that's enough for me. The man nodded slowly, writing something in his notebook. That's beautiful, he said. But you know you've already touched so many hearts. Don't you think your mother would want you to share that gift with the world? She smiled faintly. Maybe she would, but I'm still learning how to share without losing what it means to me. The interview lasted an hour. She spoke with honesty, telling her story from the beginning. Her childhood, her mother's lessons, her years of silence, and the night her fingers spoke again. When the man left, he thanked her sincerely. I'll make sure people know the truth, he said. She didn't think much about it afterward. But 2 weeks later, her life changed once again. One morning, when she arrived at the cafe, the owner met her at the door, waving a magazine excitedly. You're on the cover, he shouted, her eyes widened. There she was, and sitting by the cafe piano, smiling softly. The title read, The Girl Who Speaks Through Music. She couldn't believe it. The article inside told her story in simple words, just as she had spoken it. It wasn't about fame or success. It was about heart, resilience, and the power of quiet strength. People started coming from even farther away. Journalists, musicians, and even teachers came to meet her. Some asked her to perform on bigger stages. Others wanted to collaborate, but she was careful. She didn't want to lose the meaning behind her music by chasing attention. Still, one offer stood out, an invitation from a well-known music foundation in the city. They were organizing a charity concert for children who couldn't afford music lessons. They wanted her to perform, not as a celebrity, but as someone whose story could inspire others. She thought about it for days. The idea of stepping onto a big stage made her nervous. But the purpose behind it, helping children find hope through music, reminded her of her mother's heart. Finally, she agreed. The weeks leading up to the event were filled with rehearsals, interviews, and meetings. But through it all, she stayed grounded. The cafe remained her comfort, the piano her friend. Sometimes after long days, she would return to the cafe late at night, play a soft tune, and remind herself why she started. The night of the concert arrived. The city's grand theater was filled with people, parents, children, teachers, musicians. The lights were bright, the sound of chatter filled the air. She stood backstage, her heart racing. For a moment, she felt that old fear creeping back, the fear of being seen, of being judged, of not being enough. But then she remembered her mother's words. Music has a heart. Listen to it and it will tell you what to do. When her name was announced, the applause was thunderous. She walked onto the stage slowly, her hands trembling just a little. The piano sat under a soft golden light waiting for her. She bowed slightly and sat down. The hall went silent. She closed her eyes and then her fingers began to move. The melody was soft at first, gentle like a whisper. Each note floated into the air, pure and full of emotion. It wasn't a song anyone had heard before. It was something she had written herself, something born from all her memories, all her pain, and all her love. As she played, the crowd disappeared from her mind. She wasn't in the theater anymore. She was back home beside her mother, her small hands guided by gentle fingers. She could almost hear her mother's voice saying, "Feel it, don't force it." Her fingers danced faster, her expression full of peace. The song grew stronger, fuller, as if her soul was finally free. People in the audience began to cry quietly, feeling every word she didn't say. When the last note faded, the hall was still. And then came the applause, loud, endless, heartfelt. She stood, tears in her eyes, and bowed deeply. That night, she didn't just play music. She told her story without a single word. After the show, people came to meet her, some with tears, others with smiles. A young boy held a small keyboard and said shyly, "I want to play like you one day." She knelt and smiled warmly. "You already can," she said. "You just have to listen to your heart." The concert raised enough funds to open free music classes for children in need. The foundation invited her to lead them. She accepted, realizing this was her mother's dream coming alive again through her. Months later, the classes began. Dozens of children filled the small hall, laughing and learning. She taught them not just how to play, but how to feel, how to turn their emotions into melody. Some days, she'd tell them stories about her mother. Other days, she'd just sit and listen as they played, smiling proudly. Her life became simple again, but fuller than ever. She didn't live for fame or recognition. She lived for the quiet moments. When a child found joy in their first melody, when someone in the cafe closed their eyes while listening, when her own heart felt light again, she often thought about how far she had come, from a girl too scared to touch a piano, to someone who helped others find their own voice. And she knew her mother would have been proud. One evening, after her class ended, she stayed behind in the empty room. The sunset poured through the windows, painting the piano in golden light. She sat down and played the same melody she had played at the concert. This time she smiled through every note. Outside, the laughter of children echoed down the hallway. Inside, her music filled the air, soft and endless. She closed her eyes, feeling peace settle deep within her. She didn't need applause anymore. The music itself was enough. The quiet girl had once been invisible to the world, but through her fingers, she had learned to speak, not in words but in something deeper, something that reached hearts she'd never even met. Her mother's lessons lived on, not just in her, but in every child who touched the keys with wonder, in every person who listened with feeling. And as the night deepened, she played one last time, not for anyone else, but for herself. Each note told her story. Each sound carried her journey of love, loss, silence, and courage. The world outside kept moving, but inside that room, time seemed to stop. It was just her and the piano, just like it had been in the beginning. Her fingers moved gently, gracefully, until the last note hung in the air, warm and glowing. She lifted her hands, smiled, and whispered softly into the quiet, "You were right, Mom. Music really does speak when words can't."